Eliot Rodger here. I don't know why you girls are so repulsed by me. It doesn't make sense. I'm sophisticated. I'm magnificent. I'm the ultimate gentleman. These sunglasses here were $300. Giorgio Armani. So I'll put them on. See?
What you just saw might look like some cringy Vine-era skit, but behind those Armani sunglasses stood a man who would become a killer. The self-proclaimed supreme gentleman, the face of the incel movement. Eliot Rodger's life, at first glance, seemed like the setup for a Hollywood success story. He was born into privilege, the son of a British filmmaker who worked on blockbuster movies, and a mother who once worked in the entertainment industry. He lived in California, surrounded by wealth and opportunity. He wore designer clothes, drove a BMW, attended private schools, and grew up in neighborhoods that most people only ever see on television. Online, Rodger tried to present himself as confident, sophisticated, and even superior, posting vlogs filled with forced charm and rehearsed smiles. But behind those videos was a man consumed by loneliness, bitterness, and a need for control. What looked like vanity was actually desperation. It was the fragile ego of someone who believed the world owed him everything. Those who knew him in real life described him as quiet, detached, and pretty socially awkward. He struggled to form connections and grew increasingly resentful of the people around him, especially women. He envied the men they dated, despised couples he saw holding hands, and felt the universe itself was conspiring to deny him the affection he thought he deserved. That resentment would fester for years to come. Rodger began seeking validation online, finding comfort in echo chambers filled with other angry, isolated young men. In those dark corners of the internet, his feelings of inadequacy were reinforced. His hatred was ultimately justified. He came to believe that he was really a victim of society and not a participant in it. Over time, the sense of victimhood hardened into something far darker. He began writing about vengeance, superiority, and retribution. The warning signs were there for years. He had been in therapy since childhood. He'd been prescribed medication for anxiety and depression. And at one point, his parents were so alarmed by his behavior that they contacted the police to perform a welfare check. But when officers visited, Rodger smiled politely, acted calm, and told them everything was fine. They left without really checking much, unaware that in his bedroom sat a glowing arsenal of knives, handguns, and ammunition. Behind the scenes, he was writing a lengthy, 140-page manifesto, My Twisted World, and recording videos that outlined his plan for revenge against women and these so-called alpha males he hated the most. He described in chilling detail his belief that he was destined for greatness, and that the world would finally pay attention to him, even if it meant through blood. On the night of May 23, 2014, in Isla Vista, a college town near the University of California, Santa Barbara, Eliot Rodger put his plan into motion. Before leaving his apartment, he stabbed his two roommates and one of their friends, Cheng Hong, George Chen, and Wei Han Wang, to death, ambushing them with knives and leaving them in pools of blood. They never even had a chance to fight back. He then climbed into his black BMW and began a rampage through the streets of Isla Vista. Driving past restaurants, bars, and crowded sidewalks, he opened fire from his car window. He shot and killed Catherine Cooper and Veronica Weiss outside a sorority house, young women who he'd never even met. Minutes later, he shot and killed Christopher Michaels Martinez at a nearby deli before continuing his spree, firing into pedestrians and cyclists and striking others with his own vehicle. For nearly 10 minutes, Isla Vista was consumed by chaos. Sirens wailed, students screamed and hid behind cars. Some thought it was fireworks, others saw the flash of a muzzle and realized they were living, through a nightmare. By the time it was over, 6 people were dead, 14 were injured, and Eliot Rodger was dead himself from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. In his car, police found multiple handguns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and a camera still recording. On his laptop, they found his videos scheduled for release, the final one titled Retribution. In it, he looked into the camera and, self-satisfied, speaking about the beautiful blondes who had rejected him and the men who had stole them from him. His words were dripping with entitlement and venom. In the aftermath, investigators pieced together his timeline, his manifesto, and his digital footprint. It painted the portrait of a man driven not just by loneliness or mental illness, but by ideology, a belief that his suffering gave him permission to harm others. The community he attacked was left shattered. Families mourned children whose futures had been stolen in mere seconds. Survivors struggled with trauma, guilt, and nightmares that would follow them for life. Parents around the nation were left asking a terrible question. How does someone with so much privilege, therapy, and warning signs visible to so many still slip through every safety net? This tragedy sparked a larger conversation about radicalization, misogyny, and the growing online subculture that glorified Rodger as a martyr. He became a symbol among extremists, celebrated by those who shared his hatred. That cult-like reverence only deepened the horror. It proved that the ideology he carried didn't die with him. It spread on to others. Eliot Rodger's story forces an uncomfortable truth. Millions of people feel lonely, rejected, or unseen, but almost none turn to murder. What made him different wasn't his plan. It was his choice to embrace hatred, to blame instead of heal, to see others' happiness as an insult rather than a goal. His life serves as a grim warning about how unchecked resentment can evolve into violence, how online communities can turn vulnerability into extremism. The incel movement, once obscure, became a global concern after his rampage, leading experts, policymakers, and tech platforms to confront how digital spaces can nurture hate and silence. 6 innocent people should still be alive today, finishing college, building careers, falling in love, and living ordinary lives. Their stories deserve to outshine the darkness that unfortunately took them.
What are we doing tonight? Well, because this streaming software is kind of up the left, it means I can't check the live chat, which is a real shame. So, by all means, talk amongst yourselves. I could use my phone to dip in every now and again and check it, but I've decided that I kind of hate live streams where people just sit and read comments and go, "Oh my god, yes, ask me a question."
What looked like a streamer discussing technical issues during a cozy gaming night turned out to be one of the most shocking cover-ups in modern true crime. This wasn't just a technical glitch with the live chat, it was a smokescreen for murder. Stephen McCullagh wasn't the kind of YouTuber anyone would ever suspect of something horrific. Online, he seemed harmless. A mild-mannered gaming content creator from Northern Ireland, who streamed retro games, tinkered with tech setups, and chatted casually with a small but albeit loyal audience. He wasn't famous, he wasn't controversial, he was just an ordinary guy, and that's what made all this the more chilling. In his personal life, Stephen was in a relationship with Natalie McCullagh, a young woman who radiated kindness and optimism. She was 27 years old, loved by her family, adored by her friends, and 15 weeks pregnant with her first child. She looked forward to motherhood with excitement and warmth, decorating the nursery and sharing plans for her future. Her family described her as the kind of person who brought light into every room she walked into. But on December 18th of 2022, that light was sadly extinguished. Natalie was found brutally stabbed in her home in Lurgan, County Armagh. The crime scene told a story of violence and betrayal. There were no signs of forced entry, her phone was missing, and the brutality of the attack against a pregnant woman left the local community reeling in absolute terror. It was an act of rage and control, not just some random chaos. The investigation began immediately. Police searched for evidence, interviewed neighbors, and combed through CCTV footage. They appealed to the public for help, and right in the middle of that grief stood Stephen. Crying publicly, holding vigils, and comforting Natalie's family, he presented himself as a heartbroken boyfriend, devastated by the loss of the woman and the child he claimed to have loved. He spoke to news outlets, attended rallies, and posted tributes on social media calling for justice. No one doubted him because he had an alibi. On the night Natalie was murdered, Stephen said he was live on YouTube, streaming from home, playing old-school video games, and chatting to viewers for hours. The stream logs, timestamps, and footage all lined up. There was no reason to question it. The police took note and moved on to other suspects. To everyone, Stephen was cleared. He couldn't have possibly been in two places at once. Or so it seemed. But behind that quiet confidence, cracks were beginning to show. As investigators dug deeper, small inconsistencies started to emerge. Things that just didn't quite fit right. The time of certain texts, the way Stephen spoke about the night of the murder, and subtle behavior shifts when detectives asked follow-up questions. There was nothing concrete at first, but the unease was slowly growing. Forensic analysts began examining his devices, standard procedure in a case with no clear suspect, and that's when they discovered something truly disturbing. Stephen's live stream wasn't live at all. It had been recorded days earlier. He had pre-filmed the entire gaming session, complete with fake commentary, and then set it to auto-broadcast while he allegedly left home to murder Natalie. It was a plan that required meticulous timing and a chilling sense of calculation. He'd even added small glitches and pauses to make it look even more real, mimicking the natural rhythm of a live show. Viewers watching that night had no idea that they were watching a performance, one that covered up a crime that was actively going on as they viewed. Investigators believed that while his pre-recorded stream ran online, Stephen drove to Natalie's house, entered without force, and killed her in cold blood. The brutality suggested anger, fear, and control, the kind of violence that happens when someone feels cornered. Prosecutors would later argue that his motives stemmed from fear of fatherhood and pressure from the relationship. He didn't want to be a father. He wanted his freedom, and rather than face responsibility, he chose annihilation. Natalie's death wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was planned. Her phone was used after her death to send misleading messages, creating the illusion that she was still alive. Objects in her home were moved to make it look like a break-in. Every part of the scene was crafted to tell a false story. But the truth, as always, leaves fingerprints behind. When Stephen's description unraveled, so did his public mask. The man who once stood beside Natalie's family, crying and demanding justice, became the very monster they were hunting. Friends who had believed in his innocence felt betrayed beyond words. They couldn't reconcile the calm, tech-savvy gamer they knew with the killer the police described. The duality was unbearable. A man who could hold a candle at a vigil one night and have blood on his hands the next. In court, prosecutors revealed the full extent of the scheme. They showed the recordings, the scheduled broadcast, the timestamps that matched perfectly with the hours of the murder. There was no question. Stephen had tried to create an alibi out of pixels and pretense, to use the trust of his online audience as his own shield. and he thought no one would notice. Stephen believed technology could truly make him untouchable. But digital forensics see everything. Every edit, every upload time, every background file leaves a trace. The illusion of control he built so carefully collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. The court heard evidence that Natalie's murder was driven by rage, control, and a desperate attempt to silence the future he didn't want to face. She represented love, stability, and commitment, all things he had built his life pretending to handle but never truly accepted. He saw responsibility as entrapment. To him, fatherhood meant the end of his freedom, the end of his self-image, so he chose to destroy everything instead. Psychologists who examined the case noted a pattern: narcissistic traits, emotional immaturity, and an obsession with perception. Stephen lived through screens. He cared deeply about how people saw him. The friendly gamer, the clever tech mind, the approachable guy you see walking down the street. But underneath, there was a man terrified of being ordinary, terrified of losing control, and absolutely horrified of being exposed. When Natalie became pregnant, that illusion cracked, and rather than face the truth, he decided to script the ending himself. During the trial, the court listened to every calculated step he took, the staged messages, the planned alibi, the composure he maintained in the days that followed. There was no remorse, only a performance. He smiled on camera, attended rallies, and gave interviews, all while knowing exactly what he had done. He even shook the hands of Natalie's grieving family, pretending to share their pain. That level of deceit chilled everyone in the courtroom. When the verdict was delivered, Stephen was found guilty of murdering Natalie and their unborn son. The judge described the crime as callous and premeditated, a killing of monstrous cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term that will keep him behind bars for decades. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet sobs of Natalie's family. They had lost not one but 2 lives: a daughter, a grandchild, a future, all taken by someone who thought he could hide behind a keyboard and a microphone. The case sent shockwaves through Northern Ireland. Thousands gathered at vigils, holding candles for Natalie and her baby boy. Her family spoke with immense strength, turning their grief into advocacy. They called for greater awareness of domestic violence, and for better protections for pregnant women at risk. They refused to let Natalie's name be remembered only as a victim, but as a woman whose kindness deserved the world she never got to see. For the online world, Stephen's case became a disturbing study of deception, how easy it can be to hide behind a curated identity, how far someone will go to maintain control of their own image. What looks like just an ordinary grocery store hides a story far darker than anyone could ever imagine. The footage you just watched was taken by someone named Randy Stair, just one day before he would commit one of Pennsylvania's most horrifying workplace shootings. To the outside world, Randy was quiet, forgettable. He worked the overnight shift at Weiss Market, a small grocery store in Eaton Township. He kept to himself, stocked the shelves, clocked in, clocked out, and vanished before sunrise. But online, he was something entirely different. On the internet, Randy had transformed himself into Andrew Blaze, a name that belonged to a fictional spirit he created for an animated universe he called Ember's Ghost Squad. In that world, Randy was no longer human. He was a glowing, ghostly figure, free and powerful. It was everything he wanted to be and everything he felt he wasn't. At first, he might seem like nothing more than an artist, escaping into a creative outlet. But for Randy, it was much more than that. Ember's Ghost Squad wasn't a hobby, it was his reality. The longer he lived online, the more he rejected the world entirely. He spent years designing his fantasy universe, drawing hundreds of frames, writing stories, and voicing characters that represented the kind of people he wished surrounded him in real life. Most of these characters were female spirits who had died young and found peace together in an afterlife that Randy imagined as perfect, calm, loving, and free of judgment. And Randy wanted so desperately to join them. Randy struggled deeply with his own identity. In his private journals and videos, he expressed feelings of gender dysphoria, but instead of seeking therapy or community support, he retreated into a fictional world, using his character, Andrew Blaze, as an extension of who he wished he could be. He described this alter ego as his true self, and believed that his human body was just a temporary prison. He started to believe that death would be his transition, his way to finally exist as a spirit, female and free, in the cartoon universe he had built. His obsession grew quietly but relentlessly. He spent hours editing animated clips, blending soft ambient music with dark confessions. He recorded hundreds of monologues, some philosophical, others deeply personal, all circling around the same themes: death, loneliness, and desire to cross over. In one recording he said, "I was never meant to be here. I was born into the wrong world." This wasn't performance art, it was a manifesto forming in real time. His family and classmates described him as distant, isolated, and creative, but no one knew how dark his thoughts had really become. He had no close friends, no real social life, and no one he confided in about the storm inside his head. The internet gave him the illusion of connection, a few followers who commented on his videos, some who treated his darkness as a form of edgy entertainment. But what they didn't realize was that every like, every comment, every ounce of attention pushed him further into his delusion. He stopped seeing the difference between Andrew Blaze and Randy Stair. He began writing about crossing over, not as suicide, but as a transformation, a rebirth. He believed that by killing others, and then himself, he would shed his human shell and wake up in his animated afterlife. That belief became the center of his entire existence. His job at Weiss Markets offered him both stability and solitude. He worked nights, when the store was mostly empty, and he knew the layout better than anyone. The aisles, the exits, the patterns of who came and went. He memorized it all. To him, the grocery store stopped being a workplace. It became a stage. He talked about it in his private videos, almost like a filmmaker planning his final scene. He would film parts of the store on his phone, making cryptic comments about how this place will be where it all ends, on aisle 1. It was both chilling and methodical. Randy's plan wasn't a moment of madness. It was premeditated down to the smallest detail. He wrote about it extensively in his notebooks, which investigators later found labeled as the suicide tapes. He recorded nearly 20 hours of footage leading up to the attack, reflecting on his life, his hatred for humanity, and his desire to die as Andrew Blaze. In those videos he spoke softly, almost lovingly, about what he was about to do. He talked about how he no longer belonged here, how the world was cold and empty, how death was his only way home. He said he wanted to leave behind a legacy, something people would never forget. It wasn't fame he wanted, it was recognition, proof that he had existed, only if through destruction. By 2017, after years of spiraling, his mind was finally consumed by this fantasy. He described his coworkers not as people, but as obstacles, extras in his movie. He saw himself as the main character, the tragic anti-hero whose ending was inevitable. On June 7, 2017, the day of the shooting, Randy clocked in like any other shift. But instead of getting to work, he blocked the back exit near the bakery with his car, and pulled out a shotgun he had brought with him. Around 1 a.m., he began moving through the aisles, firing at his coworkers. 3 people lost their lives that night. Terry Sterling, age 63, a kind and patient man. Victoria Brong, 26, whose coworkers remembered her laughter. And Brian Hayes, 47, a father who was simply trying to make it through another shift. Randy killed them without hesitation, and then turned the gun on himself in aisle 1 before police could arrive. The aftermath was chaos. Police discovered his home filled with journals, video scripts, hard drive, and sketches that painted the full picture of his descent. He had written his motivations in disturbing detail, his hatred for humanity, his frustration with being stuck in the wrong body, and his unwavering belief that he would be reborn as a ghost girl in the world of Ember's Ghost Squad. He even left behind messages to his characters, telling him that he was coming home. To him, this was never just about revenge or anger. It was about escape. He believed life had failed him, that he had been denied happiness, identity, and love. He wanted to destroy the human version of himself, to erase Randy Stair, and to live eternally as Andrew Blaze. He wanted control over his story, and a world that made him feel invisible. In the weeks before his final death, he uploaded what was called his final project, a nearly hour-long animated video mixing his cartoon universe with footage of himself. It was eerie and surreal. He had planned for it to be released automatically after his death, a final statement to the world. After the shooting, investigators and psychologists who studied his case noted several key factors: long-term depression, identity dysphoria, social withdrawal, and extreme parasocial attachment to his own creation. He blurred the line between imagination and reality so completely that he convinced himself the only way to feel alive was to die. The internet had given him an audience, albeit small but constant, and in that vacuum his delusions were never challenged. There were no interventions, no warnings from those around him. He was suffering, but he was suffering in silence. In the aftermath, platforms like YouTube and Twitter began deleting his accounts, removing his videos and banning re-uploads to stop others from idolizing him. That decision sparked debate. Some argued that erasing his content also erased valuable insight into how someone could spiral that far. Others said leaving it up risked inspiring copycats, or re-traumatizing families who had already lost everything. But no matter where you stand, the human cost remains the same. 3 innocent lives were taken because one man couldn't separate fantasy from reality, because he fed his loneliness until it became obsession, and his pain until it became violence. Randy believed that death would make him eternal, that through destruction he would finally find peace. But what truly endures isn't his fantasy world or his online persona. It's the memory of the people he hurt, and the silent warning his story leaves behind. He wanted to be remembered forever, but the truth is, he's remembered as a tragic reminder of what happens when isolation festers in the dark corners of the internet. When a person gives up on being human and chooses to live inside a lie in their own fantasy world.